Hey, my name is Hubwood, and today we are going to take a closer look at NVIDIA's last 4 generations of GTX 50s. Let's go! Well, as we all know, the GPU market right now is kind of dead. It's hell. It's just a piece of shit. Well, however, if you are going to buy a GPU right now, you will have to pay a lot of money, except if you're willing to go for an older budget option, maybe even as a temporary solution. And that's why today we are going to talk about NVIDIA's last 4 generations of GTX 50s and if they are worth it in 2021. I'm specifically speaking about the GTX 750, the GTX 950, the GTX 1050 and the GTX 1650. I've chosen to go for the non-TI versions, first of all because there is no GTX 950 Ti and because they also need less power and they're still a bit cheaper than their TI counterparts. And last but not least, they don't need a separate PCI Express connection. Well, except for the GTX 950, but that card just uses ever so slightly more than the 75 watt that the PCI Express slot of your motherboard provides, so in my opinion, it's safe to say that using an adapter for your Molex cables in that case is going to be fine. Even with a very weak PSU like in an office PC, like a 300 watt PSU for example. Okay, now let's have a look at the technical details of all those cards first. All of the cards provide only 2 GB of VRAM except for the GTX 1650, which has 4 GB. Yes, I know there was a 4 GB version of the GTX 1050, but that was only available in laptops. The boost clocks, which are shown here, are the official boost clocks by NVIDIA. And for my benchmarks, I was actually using those official NVIDIA boost clocks to rule out any advantage that a better custom design might provide. So in reality, you could actually expect a slightly better performance because I was downclocking every card to the default megahertz. Also, the prices which are shown here can of course change over the next couple of weeks and might be totally different when you watch the video, but to be honest, I think it might get worse before it gets better. As we can see, the prices for the 750, 950 and 1050 are actually quite a bit below their MSRP from when they were released. And only the 1650 costs more in used state than its original MSRP. But you'll have to consider that if you want to buy the card new right now, it will cost you probably more than $250 or $300 if you can get one, that is. And at least over here in Europe, you can get all of those models used on eBay for the prices that are shown here. If you also take a closer look at the total power consumption of the whole test system using those cards, we can clearly see that they are pretty undemanding compared to high-end gaming rigs. So in theory, a 300 watt PSU, as stated before, should be enough for running all of those cards, even if you pair them with a very strong CPU like the i9 9900K, which I did in my test. The whole system never reached anywhere close to those wattages. By the way, I will also take a closer look at the brand new RTX 350, which is upcoming very soon, and it's NVIDIA's newest installment of the entry-level budget GPU line, and I hope it actually will heal the GPU market at least a bit if the card is not usable for crypto miners. Well, we will see. Let's hope for the best and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss that. Next up, let's take a look at the 3DMark Firestrike scores. In my opinion, it's in fact a benchmark that is often pretty representative and comparable to real-world benchmarks when comparing GPUs. And actually, the numbers you see here are pretty much representing the real-world differences in actual games. Meaning the GTX 750 is of course the weakest or slowest of the cards, and the GTX 950 is actually a lot faster than its predecessor, which is actually mostly thanks to the fact that it was allowed to use around 95 watts. And maybe surprising, at least to some of you, the GTX 1050 is only ever so slightly faster than the GTX 950. Why surprising? Because the difference between the 960 and the 1060 or the 970 and the 1070 and so on was much bigger. And that discrepancy is again related to power usage. The GTX 1050 uses only 75 watts instead of 95 watts. While being a bit faster, the at the same time. And in my opinion, the GTX 950 should always have been called 950 Ti, not least because it's actually pretty close to the GTX 960 in terms of performance. Now comparing the GTX 1050 and the 1650, the gap is actually pretty big once again, despite the fact that both cards use only 75 watts at maximum. As you can see, I was running each card with 3 different boost clock settings. First, I was using the official Nvidia clocks and called that factory clocks. Then I was using the actual clocks each GPU was provided by the custom design. And third, I was overclocking all the cards, which actually worked very well for all 4 models, despite the fact that they all are single fan designs and, except for the 950, can't draw more than 75 watts from the PSU. I was also testing 3 games with overclocked cards at the end of my comparison video, so make sure to check that out after watching this video. By the way, I was testing all cards with my main system, which is powered by an Intel i9 9900K at stock speeds and 32 GB of DDR4 RAM. Yeah, of course, that's kind of an unrealistic combination, but at least that lets us rule out any bottlenecks caused by the CPU or by the RAM. And in 99% of the cases and examples, even a much slower CPU, like for example an older i5 or an Ryzen 3, would actually deliver absolutely the same FPS, as the GPUs are the absolute bottleneck over here. Actually, all the cards were pretty comfortable in terms of temperatures and loudness, the GTX 950 being the hottest card, but that's probably mainly due to the higher power draw that it has. It's also the heaviest card, which means that it probably has the strongest cooler of them. And I did not repaste it, which could have provided better temperatures, considering that it's already a few years old. Now let's have a look at some gaming tests, and up front I was not able to test all the cards with Cyberpunk 2077 and Assassin's Creed Valhalla or Shadow of the Tomb Raider, because the 750 refused to work in those titles. Beginning with Assassin's Creed Odyssey on 1080p and low settings to make sure that 2 GB cards stand a chance, the GTX 750 actually provided almost 30 FPS with an average of 28 and a minimum of 22 running the integrated benchmark, while the GTX 950 was already providing an average of 41 with a stable minimum of 32 FPS, an increase of 46% of the 750. The GTX 1050 got an average of 46 FPS and a minimum of 33 FPS, an increase of 64% over the 750 and only 12% over the 950. The GTX 1650 actually crushed the other cards completely and provided 72 FPS on average with a minimum of 48. A whopping 157 increase over the GTX 750, still 75% over the 950 and 56% over the 1050. That difference is also caused by the fact that the game uses slightly more than 2 GB even on the lowest settings, giving the 1650 a clear advantage. Red Dead Redemption 2 at 1080p was actually too much for the GTX 750, even on lowest settings. It struggled with an average of 20 FPS using Vulkan. Even overclocking only resulted in 25 FPS on average, which I would hardly consider playable. The GTX 950 actually provided playable 36 FPS on average with the factory clocks, which is a huge improvement of 80% over the GTX 750. The GTX 1050 only provided little more with 37 FPS on average. That small difference might be related to the 2 GB limitation, however. The GTX 1650 again crushed the other cards with 68 FPS, being 240% faster than the GTX 750 and around 83% faster than the 950 and the 1050. Those gaps actually would be smaller when playing on 900p or 720p, but as testing so many games with so many cards, I did not have enough time to also test all the games on those lower resolutions as well. So you'll have to take my word for it, I guess. Next up is a title that doesn't need more than 2 GB of RAM to run perfectly fine. Rocket League. A now free-to-play esports title that ran with an average of 65 FPS at ultra settings using the GTX 750. The 950 achieved an average of 105 FPS, being 61% faster than the GTX 1050, an average of 111 FPS, being only 6% faster than the GTX 950. The GTX 1650 actually achieved an average of 148 FPS, which could even justify a 144Hz monitor when playing this title, considering it's an esport title. That is an improvement of 127% over the GTX 750 and 33% over the GTX 1050. As you can see in this example, the difference actually shrank a lot, most certainly due to the small VRAM usage. A quick look at Forza Horizon 4 on lowest settings, and 1080p presented an average of 45 FPS for the GTX 750. Well, that is kind of playable for a racing game if you are the undemanding type. The GTX 950 already got 72 FPS, being 60% faster and perfectly playable. Once again, the gap to the GTX 1050 is ever so slightly, with 83 FPS, being 84% faster than the GTX 750 and only 15% faster than the GTX 950. Unsurprisingly, the GTX 1650 is way ahead with an average of 131 FPS, being 190% faster than the GTX 750, 80% faster than the GTX 950 and still 53% faster than the GTX 1050. I'm starting to see a pattern here. That being said, the GTX 1650 actually had a really bad reputation, as AMD used to provide more FPS for the same price with the RX 570 before the recent GPU crisis started. For more gaming comparisons, please consider watching my dedicated comparison video for those cards after watching this. And please note that all popular esport titles are perfectly playable with all of those cards, except maybe for Call of Duty Warzone, which would probably not get enough FPS on the GTX 750. Well, to be honest, even though I call myself kind of an enthusiast considering gaming hardware, I always had a thing for those entry-level GPUs, I guess. Maybe that's because I once used to own a laptop with the very weak GTX 840M, which was barely able to play The Witcher 3, but it was able to play The Witcher 3 on a campsite, on my vacation. And I just like hardware that is able to play my favorite games, even if it's only at low settings and 30 FPS. And I'm actually not too vain to turn down the resolution to 900p or 720p if that does the trick. But since the GPU market is so upside down right now, I would absolutely consider buying one of those used older budget GPU cards to compensate until the situation gets better. Because you actually don't overpay that much, and once the prices drop, you don't lose that much of money, because even if the prices will drop once again, you can sell those cards for not that much less money than you bought them right now. The GTX 1650 provides by far the best performance, as we clearly saw, but it also has the worst FPS per dollar ratio of those cards, while at the same time having the best FPS per watt ratio. The GTX 750 should only be your weapon of choice if you can't get anything else, or anything else is too expensive for you. But only buy the 750 for older games or undemanding esport titles like Rocket League, League of Legends, CSGO or Valorant. It's actually able to run Valorant on high settings with way over 100 FPS. By the way, the GTX 950 has the best FPS per dollar ratio of those cards, if you can find a used one for below $60 or so. But don't forget that you will also need a separate 6-pin PCI power connector, or at least an adapter, which, as I said before, in that case is just perfectly fine, even with a weak CPU, even with a weak PSU. Well, that's all for today. If you like the content, please subscribe or like the video. Oh, and I'm currently testing around with a new camera and new sound, so please forgive me if it's a bit chaotic. I would love to get your feedback. By the way, PS, I forgot, if you got any questions considering those cards or configurations that you would like to try, buy, whatever, feel free to ask anything that you like in the comments. I am trying to answer as many comments as possible. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay healthy. See you next time. Bye bye and tschüss. bye.